Hi, I'm Greg. I'm the lead singer for Lipstick Generation.
And I'm Steve. I'm the bassist for the Lipstick Generation.
And welcome to the Lipstick Panel. Today on the Lipstick Panel, we're doing another movie ranking episode. Because, look, there's only 5 films in the Rambo franchise, and I had already seen 4 of them, so it was really easy for me to watch one more. And it's also really easy for me to force Steve to do things he doesn't want to do.
I'd already seen 2 films in the Rambo franchise. It was not easy to watch 3 more and to revisit those 2 so that they were fresh in my memory.
That's right, we're talking the Rambo franchise today, and we've got some excellent special guests on the program. We've got returning to the program, the podcast medium's breakout star, Mr. Chris Lathrop from Pot of Thunder. Been a long time since he's been on the show. Welcome back, buddy.
Glad to be here, especially for this discussion.
And we've got the essential guest anytime we're doing a Stallone franchise ranking on the Lipstick Panel. We've got the man, the myth, the legend, my brother who I jammed on Take You Back from Rocky at Rockin' Pod with, Mr. Lee McCormack. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, man, thanks for having me back. Good to talk to you. And yeah, we rocked out some Stallone there. Some Frank Stallone at the Rockin' Pod, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we love all forms of Stallone on the Lipstick Panel.
It's true, yeah.
We love Rocky, we love Rambo, we even love Frank. That's how supportive of Stallone we are on this show. So, as is the usual format of our episodes for first-time listeners, we start by going around the panel talking about our history with the subject at hand. So, if you don't like that, like some of our commenters, I don't know, just skip later in the episode. You know how podcasts work. Jeez. But yeah, we're going to go around and talk about our history with the Rambo franchise. I want to go in order of how much I think people love the franchise. So I'm going to start with Lee, then move to Chris, then go to myself and close out with Steve.
What order are you thinking we love the franchise?
I think Lee loves it the most. Okay. I think Chris likes a lot. I think I'm probably a little bit more nuanced and you probably like it the least, is my hunch.
Okay, all right. We're going descending order of
descending order.
Okay.
So let's start with Lee.
Okay, well, you know how much I love Rocky, right? And so when Rocky came out, I was all in for Rocky, and he became my childhood hero. So, that was like the early 80s, and that's when, there was a thing in my generation where what we would do, we would rent VCRs and rent videos at a video store, right? Like early 80s, this was going on. So I would rent all the Stallone films I could find after, becoming a huge Rocky fan. So, one weekend I rented First Blood. And I must have watched that movie about 5-6 times on that weekend. And, just that movie became just like a favorite movie of mine. And then a few years later when Rambo 2 came out, and then a few years later after that, Rambo 3, this character, became a franchise character. And, just it's almost as special to me as Rocky. I just love Stallone and, following that character through 5 movies now. And it's kind of cool because, the way Rocky was kind of like this nice, sweet guy, like Rambo was kind of like the opposite, like still a good guy, but like it's like some darkness to him, right? So, I really dug the character.
And Chris, how about you? What's your history with the Rambo franchise?
Well, I saw the second one in the theater when it came out. I don't remember why the first one kind of eluded me, but seeing that second one inspired me to double back and check out the first one. The third one I didn't bother to go see when it came out, and it was a long time before I did see it. And then the fourth and fifth ones I've seen both in the theater within a week or two of their premiere. So pretty engaged overall. Own all of them on Blu-ray, except for the latest one, of course, but I will when it comes out to complete the collection. And
you pirated it to put on a Blu-ray just so you could have it immediately.
I think I can wait. We'll talk about that later. But, huge fan of the franchise, huge fan of Stallone, and of course Rocky, and looking forward to breaking down these 5 movies.
So I'm a huge Sylvester Stallone fan. He is my favorite actor, and I love the Rocky movies. It is my favorite film franchise. But I don't know if there's a single Rambo film in my top 10 Stallone movies. Now, granted, that's because 8 of those slots are taken up by the Rocky and Creed franchise. So that is how much I love the Rocky franchise. And I like Cobra quite a bit, so Cobra gets in there. And then Oscar, I think, is a hilarious comedy. So unfortunately, there isn't room for Rambo in my top 10 of Stallone films. I have mixed feelings with the franchise, where there's a part of me that wants to love it, and instead I just like it. And it's sort of a frustrating thing for me, where I think just a lot of the story elements and plot beats don't work for me. But there's something visceral about seeing Stallone ripped, with that bandana, with a machine gun, fighting bad guys, that just feels good on a primal level. But honestly, they're not some of my favorite Stallone movies. There's a lot of Stallone movies I like quite a bit more than this, like Nighthawks, and even Rhinestone I like more than most of the Rambo films. So I enjoy them, but I don't love them. And so I have a very mixed response to the franchise overall. And I think, honestly, the Rocky films hurt these films in a way because I love those so much, and I respect them so much as well-written works of art, where I look at the Rambo series and I think to myself, Sly, you could have written something better. So I still enjoy them, and I own the entire franchise on DVD except for one of the films, which we will discuss later. Well, one of the films aside from the one that just came out. But, yeah. So that is my history with them. A little bit more mixed. I saw most of them in high school, revisited them for this podcast. Saw the fourth Rambo film, 2008's Rambo. Saw that on my 18th birthday at midnight. The only person who wanted to go with me was my grandma, who apparently is much more hardcore than I had realized. Because none of my friends wanted to go see Rambo, but my grandma's like, yeah, sure, I'll go. He'll blow up some stuff. And so...
Oh, he certainly did.
Millennials. Too wimpy to go see Rambo, but my grandma... hard bitch, apparently.
She's like, I saw worse things than this in the war.
It was so cute when he ripped out the rapist's throat. So, Steve, how about you? What's your history with the Rambo franchise?
So I saw First Blood, I think, back in college and thought, this is a pretty good film. And then a few years later, when the fourth one came out, I went and saw it in the theater and was like, this is a dumb, forgettable action movie. And then I just didn't really think about Rambo for years and years and years, other than just as how he's part of the zeitgeist. And then Greg sat me down and had me watch the entire series in the last month or so. And I spent the entire time drinking heavily and looking at these films and saying, I like this scene better when Weird Al did it exactly the same. Or when it was in Hot Shots Part 2.
Or when it was animated on Saturday mornings.
I didn't watch that cartoon as a kid, unfortunately.
The Force for Freedom.
Force for Freedom. I don't know. I've read a lot more anarchist authors and things like that, and so I understand the subtext and the political messaging behind these movies better watching them as an adult. And I'm like, wow, these are mostly really, really bad. American interventionism is not a good thing. Maybe these movies that are just like, yes, the only problem with the Vietnam War was that we lost. Yeah. There's 2 of these that I'm okay with existing. The rest of them should just be relegated to the dumpster of history, I think.
Yeah, so there we go, a diverse panel of opinions. I think.
Hey, Lee, can I ask Lee a question?
Yeah.
Which have you seen all of these in the theater, or what's your history with seeing them in the theater when they sort of close to when they came out?
Yeah, I saw all in the theater except for the first one. First one I saw on a VHS rental, and then all the other ones I saw. Actually, the 2008 one I didn't see in the theater. I was working on cruise ships then, so yeah, all of them except for the first and the fourth, I guess.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but man, I don't know where you're looking for like some deep political meaning behind these things.
Well,
like these are great fun movies, man.
We'll set him straight as
Are you going to try to pretend there isn't deep political meaning behind these films?
And millennials looking for meaning behind everything. Come on.
Yes, man. All art has meaning.
Well,
all art expresses the political worldview of the artists who created it.
I think there's so to touch on a couple of things quickly. I think Chris, I kind of think I know where he's going to get once we get into the individual films, but ultimately, I think what these films are known for is big action spectacle, which might not translate as well to the small screen, versus seeing it in a theater with a bunch of people, the excitement of the crowd. So that is a factor to consider into it. And also...
Yeah, murder those foreigners.
Also, as Chris has mentioned on Pot of Thunder in the past, not all art necessarily transcends generations and works well for a new generation that wasn't there originally. So there are some works of art that are really great across time. So there are reasons why people keep going back to Sherlock Holmes novels, 200 years later. Because they hold up to a degree even as cultural shifts change. Versus, there are certain things about the Rambo movies that I could see not translate into a younger generation, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're completely without merit. I think there's just, I think the Rocky films are much more universal stories.
Birth of a Nation really was a triumph of cinema and the craft.
Okay, this isn't Birth of a Nation. That's a bullshit argument.
I mean, it's disingenuous, but it's not entirely inaccurate. It's one of those, 10% serious jokes. And that, yes, Birth of the Nation was legitimately a massive sea change in how film was made and did a lot to advance the art. And is also sort of an indefensible piece of racist history.
But what I'm saying is I'm not saying that these films are indefensible pieces of racist history. I think there's a lot more nuance to them than people are going to give them credit for. And I think it's best if we just get into the ranking, discuss film by film. But I just wanted to address those major points. And as far as art having varying degrees of meaning, I mean... Look, I listen to Kiss, so I acknowledge that a lot of art is bullshit that doesn't mean anything. I also listen to the entire Bruce Springsteen catalog, and you know what? It's kind of a good comparison. Maybe the Rocky movies are like Bruce Springsteen, and the Rambo movies are like Kiss, where the Rambo movies are cool, dumb explosions, but they're pretty fucking fun. And then, you've got the Rocky movies, which are Springsteen, was like, this has more heart, but maybe doesn't have as many cool explosions.
All right, yeah.
There's little explosions to distract you from the lyrics about teenagers.
But we'll get into that as we discuss the movies.
So, coming in at the bottom of the ranking, the film I ranked right in the middle of the series with 3 points, we've got Rambo 3 coming in at the bottom.
Yeah. This is still a good movie. I still really like this one. And when you... Like I said, when we were discussing the Rocky movies, when you look at this movie as just part of the 5 films, it just works as like another chapter in the story, right? But alone, it's probably the least of my favorite too. This is one that I saw in the theater, and this is when I started going to movies by myself, which is actually kind of a preferable way for me to see movies. I think the first movie I went to see by myself was Superman 4. And I was like, yeah, that was pretty good not having anybody to talk to during a movie, right? Bother you. So I saw this one in the theater, and I thought it was cool. And this is probably the best looking one of the films up to then. There was a lot of the budget on this movie was real a lot. One of the, I think the highest budgeted movie up to that point was this film. And you see the shape that Stallone is in for this movie. His body is incredible. Talk about a guy that's been able to turn his body into a machine for these movies, right? I think there's that one shot where he's putting his headband on, and there's just a shot of his back, and it's all fucking flexed, and he's got muscles on top of muscles, and it's just badass, right? But the premise of this movie where he's going to Afghanistan to rescue Troutman from these Russians that have taken hold of the Afghanis is kind of in hindsight. The political elements of it doesn't really work either, right? But
that time that he teamed up with the Taliban, yeah.
Well, to be fair, the Taliban were a portion of the people that he teamed up with, right? Like the Taliban were formed from this group of rebels, like the bad part of the rebels, right? So,
yeah, I mean it's a bit more complex than that, but yeah, they splintered off and formed the Taliban, and obviously decided that they didn't like America very much. I think that this is one of the more enjoyable films in the franchise to watch. I liked that they added a lot of elements of humor to it. For me, that I think was a fun addition. You know, the little joke about the blue light. What does it do? It turns blue. Just like the little one-liners and quips were fun. I think the action set pieces were some of the best in the series. The dude getting hanged and then exploding was akin to the final death in Cobra, where the dude gets impaled on the spikes and then falls into the flames. So, you know,
absolutely the best scene in the movie, hands down.
Yeah. So
that's a slam dunk.
Yeah, it's so there's a lot of great moments in this film. And I think it's well paced. I think it doesn't get repetitive. I think they do a good job of mixing up the scenes and giving like a good ebb and flow of momentum so it doesn't feel too samey. And I think that stick fight at the beginning was a really fun sequence. Like, I think this is visually, it's visually great. It's fun. And honestly, in terms of the politics at the time, it's somewhat reasonable if you look at it as the sense of, hey, we learned our lesson from Vietnam. You shouldn't try to intervene and take over someone else's country because that won't work. And so we were wagging our finger at Russia saying, hey, you shouldn't do this because we learned our lesson and that's bad. In retrospect, you know, it was the Taliban, and that wasn't like the people you should go to bat for. However, I understand what they were trying to say with it, which was imperialism is bad. Maybe we should not do as much imperialism, you guys, and let's scold someone else for doing that thing we did, 10 years prior. So I get it, but I think this is it's a fun action movie, and one of the ones, like I said, I ranked it in the middle. Yeah. It's one of the easiest for me to just sit down and rewatch. So yeah, I like this one.
That one scene where they're playing like ride the horse and pick up this dead sheep and throw it in the fucking the circle or whatever. And there's that one shot where Sly leans down off the horse to grab the sheep. This looks amazing, right? The film work in this movie is really good.
Lawrence of Arabia-esque in terms of scope.
Hell yeah. And then you see the big helicopter come in. Yeah.
But yeah, it feels like a big, grand epic. And that's kind of what I think this is one of the two movies that I think best defines like what I think of when I think of the Rambo franchise, like what the franchise represents. Doesn't mean it's necessarily my favorite, but in terms of like films that represent Rambo when I think of Rambo, like this is one of them.
Yeah. 88.
So Chris, how about you? What are your thoughts on Rambo 3?
I had this fifth on my list. I actually revisited it yesterday. I hadn't seen it in a while. It was better than I remember it, but my objections with the film are, beginning with the stick fight. I prefer the pool cue battle between Steven Seagal and the Asian thug in Out for Justice. I'd rank that one higher than this one in terms of that style of fighting. And then for me, it took a good hour before the real action started to kick in. So I disagree with you on the pacing. I think it was a little slow to really get moving, like an hour's worth of slow. And I also think that the Rambo character's sort of personal involvement in the scenario that the movie is based on is kind of the least of all the films, even though he's going to save Troutman. Troutman's a fellow soldier, so it just seemed a little more business-like to me rather than emotional, which the emotions of the other ones kind of took it to the next level for me. And then I'll just close with just sort of the general feeling I have that this one is far and away the most jingoistic of the movies in terms of, the political climate of the times. The Russians were the boogeyman of the day. The Afghan fighters were going up against the big bad Russians. Very interesting that in the present day, we're still at war in Afghanistan and our president is in bed with the president of Russia. Find that very interesting. And then the bit at the end dedicated to the gallant people of Afghanistan, analyzing this in the present day, just the irony and kind of reversal of how things have unfolded over time is just, too much not to comment on. And just a little, and I'll let Steve handle that. I'm sure he's chomping at the bit to go after that stuff. He's more equipped to comment on that than me. But, in general, I'll just say, it's last for me because, again, the most jingoistic of the movies, but I did find it to be better than I remembered it when I watched it again yesterday.
Steven, I cede the floor to you.
Yeah, so of the bad Rambos, I feel like this one is the least bad in that, the whole CIA secretly smuggling weapons to quote-unquote freedom fighters in order to vanquish the scourge of communism. History has done a good enough job of, showing our ass on that this movie aged badly, and I think everybody sort of recognizes it. So at this point, watching it 30 years in the future, it's a little more funny than the rest of them. Just like, oh geez, we really shot ourselves in the foot over there in Afghanistan, and continue. Well, I guess our feet are more being hit by improvised explosive devices. Boy, the CIA sure does some evil crap.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the Rambo movies is that if I have no knowledge of politics, I like them way more.
Right?
Where it's just good
that
guy.
Helps, yes.
Yeah, good guy going in fighting bad guys. It just it feels visceral, it feels pure. But when you actually look at the subtext of each situation, you're just man, I want to just turn off this part of my brain and just enjoy Rambo killing these dudes. But I also remember what imperialism is.
Right. See, that's why your Cobras and your Demolition Mans and your Death Race 2000s are better, because there isn't a real world actual people group parallel to the bad guys that, Cobra is killing.
And also
other than a little bit, crime rates in minority neighborhoods, but that's a little bit easier to hand wave away than,
right. Plus, Cobra was fighting an evil gang of axe-wielding dudes. Guys who get together in an abandoned factory and clank axes together.
If only the Russians had more axes, it would be easier.
He was fighting juggalos, those hatchet-wielding motherfuckers. So, that's something we can all get behind. So, Cobra, universal themes of fighting juggalos. But I think there's something to be said about if the group you're fighting against is clearly fictional, it's a lot easier to not worry about the implications of it. But when we know the context of these different scenarios, I think that's one of the things that makes the Rambo movies harder to follow with passing generations, just as you get more and more knowledge of history and the context of the situation. But if I just view it as fictional soldier guy from America land fights these bad, evil army of white people in the deserts, it's not as bad. But
if you view it that way, then it's just the worst of the Mad Maxes. That's probably better than Mad Max 1.
Here's hot take, Troy. I like all of these films better than Fury Road.
I'm insane with anger.
Hot takes.
Yeah, but I don't know. I still think it's a fun film.
So you're objecting to Rambo siding with the Afghanistan, or are you objecting to Rambo fighting the Russians?
I'm not objecting to actually. I think the political situation in this one is actually the most reasonable of the films. So I don't really have objection for it at the time, because at the time, if you view it as the Afghani people are fighting these invading Russian assholes, I can understand why it would be reasonable for an American in that time to take the stance that, you know, the Rambo character did. Like, that's reasonable. I think that, you know, American imperialism has been a problem across our history, and that any form of promoting imperialism can come off as disingenuous and dangerous, and there's certain films in the franchise that maybe push that narrative forward, even if it's unintentionally. But I think that ultimately, because there's nuance and gray area there, it's not as clear as these are just propaganda films that are trash, need to be done away with, but they're also not completely without examining and worrying about, like, the kind of message that is implied, even if it's not the intended message. I think there's still enough, like, it's such a gray area, and I just want it to be like one way or the other, black or white, where I can just say, man, fuck these movies, they suck, or man, fuck these movies, they're awesome. But I'm like, man, I'm so fucking conflicted about these movies, and I want to love them, but I have things that bother me. I hate nuance. And this is why I can't be a politician, because I believe in nuance and discussion and discourse.
My objection is, why is Troutman a colonel? Why is he, like, going on this mission on the front lines? Like, isn't he too old for this? Like,
he's too old for this shit.
Too old for this shit. Oh, man.
Too old for this. Yeah, well, that's the other thing about this movie that I didn't really like, is how they kind of turn it into, like, a buddy cop thing at the end, where even though it's cool, like, here's Rambo and Troutman fighting side by side. You know, that would have been better for the cartoon rather than the movie, I think, you know?
Yeah, that's where it got a little lazy for me. It's like
I kind of love that part.
I mean, it's fine from an entertainment standpoint, but yeah, I'm with you. What's old ass Troutman gonna do in that situation? I mean, come on, it's like
old ass Troutman.
The only thing
though.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that disappointed me is, like, you know, with the repeated hangings by his arms, that they didn't dip him in a leech-infested slime pit like Rambo got in the second movie. That would have been a great tie-in for me. But, you know, in general, I think you nailed it right there. It's like they tried to turn it into some kind of buddy movie, and that's where it lost me.
It was cool to see him crash a tank into a helicopter, though.
Well, that's the second best scene for me, obviously, and you know, the guttural tribal screams that he lets out just before impact. You know, but still far and away second to the, you know, dropping the guy down the hole on the cable, and he's just. And then detonates literally right in the middle of the hole. I mean, if that doesn't hit you on a primitive caveman level, you've just got that stuff buried way deeper inside of you than I do, because that just watching it yesterday, I literally erupted in laughter, and then just, you know, felt my chest puffing out. You know. Autonomously. Yeah. Just amazing.
One little last fact I have on this movie is that in 1990, the Guinness Book of World Records deemed Rambo 3 the most violent film ever made, with 221 acts of violence, including 70 explosions and over 108 characters killed on screen. You know, however, the body count of the fourth film in this series surpassed that record with 236 kills.
Yeah.
Well, sadly, the fourth film in the franchise is not next on the list. Next up,
that would have been a good segue, though, man.
It would have been. But next up is First Blood Part 2, Rambo, coming in fourth place. Now, I feel this has got to be a shocker for Chris.
This I don't understand, but...
Yeah, so actually, you can blame... You just know how normally you can blame Steve or myself for this kind of bullshit?
Yo, so far, Greg and I are in total agreement about which which ones we've ranked where so far.
Yeah, so the thing is, Lee, myself, and Steve all gave this 2 points, so we all put in the exact same position. So Lee, who also grew up loving the franchise, is also to blame for this.
Well, yeah, I'll go first if you don't mind. And it's just because I love the first one so much and I love the last 2 so much. But, this one was a really great movie. And this one is where it took the character to this whole new level where it spawned like a Saturday morning cartoon show. It spanned action figures, comic books, all that shit, right? Like, I had all the action figures, right? And I was like into like wrestling figures too. So I would have like John Rambo battle the Iron Sheik because I had wrestling figures and stuff like that, right? So
you used your Rambo action figures to reenact Rocky 3 is what you're saying.
Yeah, kind of stuff like that, right? Yeah. Thunderlips versus John Rambo. There was lots of good stuff going on, right? So when I was 10, 11 years old when this movie was out, so I was right into it. I bought like one of those survival knives, right? And I would go like into the forest with this compass and try and get out, pretend it was Rambo. And so I love this movie, like all the explosions and that's when Rambo got his bow and arrow, right, with those exploding arrowheads. And it was cool to see him go back to Vietnam and put some of his his training in purpose. You saw how he would like handle attacking troops and stuff like that. And so this was a cool movie, but it's really over the top, and I think it just doesn't hold up the way the others do as films for me. But, at the time, I really loved it. But I just think in hindsight, it doesn't hold up for me as well as the other ones,
My favorite part of this film was how the bad guy was right for most of it. Like
that's Charles Napier, right? Yeah, Charles Napier as Marshall Murdoch.
Yeah, like his whole shtick is like, all right, so here's what needs to happen. You need to go in and you need to not interfere. You just need to gather evidence so that we can go through the proper channels and actually rescue these POWs. And instead, Rambo's like, no, I'm going to pull them out myself. And then only at the very end are they like, oh no, it turns out Rambo was actually right and the bad guy was planning on not doing anything. Like, yeah, I buy that.
That should have been apparent to you throughout the whole movie. See, that's where you're wrong, is the fact that the Charles Napier character, they had no intention of going through any proper channels. It was just a dog and pony show to appease certain bureaucrats and also to make it seem like they were doing something to investigate the POW situation.
I mean, the language of cinema dictates that had to be how things turned out eventually, but it was not done well in terms of filmmaking, in that there was no clue that was what was actually going to happen. They were just like, oh, that was what happened all along, and, Rambo was retroactively justified in his behavior. Like, Rambo never says anything about, like, I don't believe you, I'm just going to rescue them anyway. He just disobeys orders, and it happens to have turned out well.
Well, he was completely abandoned at the beginning, right? He was abandoned as soon as he got kicked off that plane.
Well, yeah, and they were not expecting him to find anybody over there.
Right.
So the other thing, based on what we're talking about here, is back to what Greg said earlier about, trying to separate storyline from reality. The problem with the Rambo franchise is each one is tied into something that was going on in the real world at the time.
Right.
Yep.
So the mid-'80s was full on, Vietnam reinvestigation. You had the later in the decade, you had the Platoons, you had Full Metal Jacket, you had Hamburger Hill. That was definitely a big deal at the time.
Born in the USA.
Yeah, and right alongside of that was the whole POW question and the whole, assumption, conspiracy theory, whatever you want to call it, of whether of the U.S. knowing about the POWs, knowing where they were, and not doing anything about it to rectify the situation due to certain agreements that were made that ended the war. So that's really at the root of it. So I agree that looking back on it, they maybe didn't necessarily address that so that subsequent generations could make that connection. But if you were watching that movie in the mid-'80s you knew just by the way the Napier character was conducting himself that he was the guy who was just putting on the dog and pony show to appease certain people with no intention whatsoever of ever following through on a POW rescue, much less even thinking that he would find them. So I think, having seen the movie in that climate kind of makes that is why it was definitely more abundantly clear for me. I'll just continue on and say that this is second on my list. Pacing this movie is incredible. Relentless action throughout. From the time he puts his love interest in the ground to the end of the movie is nonstop, unrelenting, an incredible ride for a good 40-45 minutes. Amazing stuff, nonstop. And just great casting. Napier is perfect. You got the fucking dojo guy from Karate Kid, who's the asshole.
Martin Cove. Yeah,
who leaves him behind. The pencil neck guy with the mustache who takes the exploding arrow is perfect cast as well. And the other thing is, I saw this one in the theater. That scene I just referenced, right alongside Rocky 1 in terms of bringing people in that theater to their feet, raising fists in the air, and just cheering like you were at an actual event at the screen. So, that type of experience is what lifts this one all the way up to number 2 for me.
Also, that guy from the villain from Beverly Hills Cop, right? Is the Russian.
Oh yeah, right.
What was his name? Victor Maitland.
Yeah,
Victor Maitland.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, that's right. Put it in his eye. Incredible shit. And just
that end standoff scene where they're in the fucking helicopters and Stallone's faking it, and then he just jumps up with the fucking bazooka and blows them up.
Incredible.
Come on, yeah. Rambo.
That was another one that, again, when he snapped out of it with that bazooka, motherfuckers were on their feet in the theater.
Yeah, they were.
Screaming, cheering at the screen. It was an unforgettable time for me. My top 3 theater experiences, Rambo 2, Rocky 1, and Jaws. Incredible stuff. So,
Summer 85, man.
So I guess I'll go next and leave Steve to decimate the film after I go. So I actually started taking some notes because there's a lot I wanted to get into. So this is actually, I think, out of all the Rambo movies, the one with the worst pacing. So I disagree with Chris on that. And that I remember the first time I watched the movie, it just felt like, I'm ultimately very much a narrative, character-driven kind of person when it comes to the kind of media I consume. And so Steve and I have discussed many times how he's more of a world-building guy and is more interested in the world and the setups, and I'm more interested in, arcs and how characters personally grow. Hence the Rocky films being my favorite, film franchise. And, there is that nonstop mayhem of action sequences, but I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, because I'm coming at this as a younger viewer looking at an older action movie, as technology has gotten better, the action sequences kind of bored me the first time I saw it, in that they were all good in isolation, but it was like, okay, let's get back to plot and narrative, because there was so much action all in a row with very little plot. And so I remembered young middle school Greg joked that the film was very similar to The Passion of the Christ, where you could walk away for 20 minutes and not have missed anything. Oh, what happened? Rambo killed a bunch of dudes. Oh, what happened? Jesus kept getting tortured. So, the fact that it does I liked Rambo 3 breaking up the action a little bit more. It helped make the action stand out as more impactful to me personally. But going back and rewatching it over the years, I've learned to really appreciate that sequence and like it. But I'll admit, the first time I saw it, the first couple times, it didn't really work for me. But I think, in terms of what I think of a Rambo film, it's Rambo in the jungle. Like, this is the one where he's in the jungle doing his Rambo thing. It has, iconic visuals, grand scale. Him jumping out of the exploding boat is just fucking awesome.
Damn right it is.
Like, this is, I understand, the political message that it was trying to get across. And the thing is, once again, I don't think that any Rambo movie necessarily has a bad political message, but they have political messages that can unfortunately be easily misconstrued if you're not looking at them with a lot of nuance. And I understand why people aren't looking at them with a lot of nuance, because they're the fucking Rambo movies.
You're not supposed to look at them with a bunch of nuance.
But there was also a degree of cynicism at the time where, everyone was cynical about the Vietnam War and people were trying to get back to a feeling good about being American thing. And, getting back to a stage of optimism. That's ultimately what Rocky 1 was about, was optimism. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't think so. I having lived through that, I don't think that's accurate. I think what Rambo 2 is trying to capitalize is that cynicism and that suspicion, and the whole Vietnam experience was around the first time when people started to question the U.S. government, as World War II, and was like, hey, greatest generation, we're all united, this and that. And maybe that kind of came into question during the Korean conflict, but the Vietnam War was when it's full on citizens questioning the government, questioning our motives. And for some reason, in the 80s, there was a resurrection of that, looking back on it, and that's what the second film was trying to capitalize on. And I agree, it was definitely ham-fisted at times, especially the closing speech by Stallone is obviously geared toward the lowest common denominator. But I don't think it was going against any sort of like, let's be optimistic attitude. I think it was definitely playing on the political climate of the times with regard to that period of American history.
Well, I'm largely basing this off an interview I saw with Stallone years ago about trying to make Vietnam somehow into a victory for America. And the idea, like, do we get to win this time, was sort of like the thesis and idea for the film. So I don't have the interview cited and at hand. I haven't seen it in years, but that's where my interpretation of that comes from. But what you're saying is completely valid, and I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think it's somewhere in between the two, where I think it is like that cynicism of just like, yeah, man, get our troops back, but also trying to get America to a place of healing and closure is maybe, I think, a fair statement of maybe what the film was trying to go for in some ways.
I don't know about that, but interested in hearing Steve's take on it.
I mean, I don't have a take more devastating than Greg's. It's just like The Passion, in that you can leave for 20 minutes at a time and not miss anything important to take down. I mean, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's not a great film. The whole idea of like, let's revisit the Vietnam War but win this time is pretty ridiculous. What you said about
but that's not what he means by that, though. That's not what he means by win this time. When he says, do we get to win this time, it means, do we get to like not have jurisdiction tell us things to do, like pull out and things like that, right? Like, so he's fighting against the system, he's fighting against the man.
I mean, well, ultimately, the issue with these sorts of things is that, like, the United States since that time has been the dominant military power. The only thing that stops the United States from winning in any given theater of war is wherewithal. Same as, the only thing that stopped the English from defeating the America during the American Revolution was wherewithal, that they just weren't willing to invest the resources in it. And I think, rightly so to a large extent, we look at these giant quagmire wars and say, hey, how many, trillions of dollars and young bodies do we want to throw at this problem before we realize that we're not actually making things better?
Well, and also the British compared to Americans are simply pussies. So throw that out there.
Indeed, but they had way more of those, pussy British soldiers and the resources to send them over.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It wasn't in their backyard, and at the end of the day, they're not savages like the weirdos who came over here and colonized this country. So I think on some level we're in agreement.
I think so, yes. But yeah, so
which I think is the first time Steve and I have ever agreed on anything. So that's quite a breakthrough.
I think you two have both agreed that I'm full of shit on a couple of occasions.
Yeah, probably.
Given. That's a given. That's like the sun coming up in the morning.
Right. We do agree that the sun rises most mornings and sets most evenings.
Yes. Generally in the west as far as rising, but anyway, go on, Steve.
But yeah, so again, the politics of it are pretty bad. The context you provided of there being a lot of things that younger generations may not have recognized in the language of cinema. That's fair. Like it's possible that I did misread that as, somebody who was born after this, I guess, I don't know, when did this movie come out? What month did this come
85.
out?
85.
Somebody who wasn't born until about another 2 months later. There may have been some implied subtext to the characters that was not recognizable to me. To me, it sure looked like
no mistake.
The bad guy was just right.
That they didn't do a great job of addressing that for people like you, because it was not their intention to create a historical, sort of historically significant film. They were trying to capitalize on the popularity of the first movie, the political climate, and so in that respect, the nuance was left out. But make no mistake, that was the underlying notion that was going on there.
And of course, the love interest was both an unnecessary subplot, and of course they fridged her pretty badly, which was pretty common for action movies in this era, and continues on in action movies all the way up through about 2 weeks ago when the last one came out.
Well, we'll get to that one when we get to it.
Yeah, and also I'm glad you brought that up, because I was about to I had glossed over that, but see, this is what takes. Well, this was second on my thing, but so it actually didn't factor in to it factors into more of the two more recent ones, whereas that's what I think took it beyond the third one, where he's his motive is to save Troutman. These odd romantic connections seemed to engage the character a little more for me in the other movies. Got him. I mean, there's no denying that when they killed his woman in Rambo 2, from that moment on, it is balls out. Everybody in my way is going to get fucking mowed down. It's because they killed his woman. If they'd have killed Troutman, I don't think he would have gone that far into rage like he did when they killed his Eurasian girlfriend.
Well, that's the character, man. He's just looking for somebody to turn that switch on, right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter what it is. He's just looking for a reason to turn into that machine that
He needs that excuse to murder all the whoever happens to live in whatever country he's in right now.
Right.
And when
the bad guys that deserve what they're getting.
And when the person who's killed is someone who gives him a little movement in his nether region, I think it takes it to the next level.
But honestly, I'd sort of disagree on that whole plot point, though. I think, he has a real relationship with Troutman that is established through, 3 movies. This random woman that he met at the beginning of this film and, made out with a little bit immediately before she dies. It's just like, it's such a cheap plot point.
I don't disagree, but I think I think it's clear throughout these movies, and we'll discuss in the next couple, that something about the love interest or the female, damsel in distress sets him off on a different level.
That trope got completely ruined for me a couple of years back when I picked up a 50 classic kung fu movies collection, just like a bunch of cheap kung fu movies from the 70s and 80s, and like almost all of them use that trope of the thing that motivates the final slaughter of all of the bad guys using swords and or kung fu is the implied sexual assault or murder of the girl that the main guy likes, and then he proceeds to kill everybody, and then as soon as they're all dead, roll credits.
Well, I mean, I think there's a reason why there's trope exists. There's a reason why there's a cliche that somebody says of a beautiful woman, that's the kind of woman that countries go to war over.
Yeah, there's something visceral about it.
That's the kind of woman I would crash a tank into a helicopter for.
I mean, as someone who has had those...
Exactly.
Well, to get serious for a moment, I have had,
serious, Greg. I'm
nothing but serious.
But, I have had...
I laugh because I'm sad like a clown.
I have experienced, acts of violence against women in my family, and anyone who has dealt with that, any man who has dealt with that, the visceral rage that you feel from that is incredibly powerful. And so when it's taken to an extreme of that person dying, I think if you've experienced that to any degree in your life, watching a movie like this makes more sense, where even though the writing might not be good and the development of their relationship might not have been great, there's still something primal that awakens within you when you see violence against a woman, and you as a man are just like, I'm gonna fucking murder that person. So,
well, that's the movie cliche trick that anyone can do, right? If you want to get the audience to sympathize with anything, just have something affect a family or a loved one, because everybody can relate to that, right?
Right. Just fridge somebody.
But before we move off of
First Blood 2, Rambo.
Can we talk about that badass scene where he's like in the fucking mud and he's like creeping up on that guy and he just comes out of the wall as the mud guy and kills that fucking guy? Isn't that the best?
that was another one where it seemed that theater, man. Just that whole sequence. The theater was electric.
And we should note that this was co-written by Sly and James Cameron, right? So a lot of those action scenes were co-written with James Cameron. So
I didn't know that actually. Yeah.
And this was the most successful out of all 5 films, making $300 million at the box office in 1985, which is pretty astounding.
I think it topped Rocky IV.
Oh, yeah. Greg and I were talking about that right after watching this. Like, how much of the fact that her accent changed every other line was because there were 2 writers who couldn't decide if she was going to, speak like a normal person or do the me love you long time thing.
Well, she's clearly a war baby, so half the time she was talking like her daddy, half the time she was talking like her mom.
She just alternates, as most people who are raised in a mixed family tend to do.
She was brought up in a varied household, Steve. Why can't you be more sympathetic?
Steve, I didn't know you were so racist.
Yeah, exactly. You should be a little more understanding to this type of thing.
So before we get to the next movie, there's a couple quick notes I want to get to. The line, what you call hell, he calls home. Badass.
Yeah.
Stallone just saying, fuck you, to the Russians. Badass. And him saying, Murdoch, I'm coming to get ya.
Yeah, with the close-up on the mouth, right, as he's in the helicopter. Yeah.
And, like, Murdoch's eyes widening. Badass.
And just the tightening grip on the microphone. incredible. And since you brought fuck you to the Russians, how about the fuck 'em in Rambo 3? That's an awesome one.
Yes. Stallone does a good job dropping the F-bomb as Rambo. And the one final thing, touching briefly on his physique, for a lot of the narrative of the Rambo movies, this is the one that feels like the first one in the saga. I'll talk about First Blood a little bit later, but for some reason, this is where it feels like the movies become Rambo, and there's a clear narrative throughout, and then First Blood is a separate thing that exists in a separate universe for me.
Oh yeah, it seems wholly unrelated.
So for me, like, the Rambo story starts with First Blood Part 2 at the prison, and we'll talk about First Blood when we get to it.
Although this is the one that best establishes continuity between them.
Right.
In that, like, this has a direct connection to the previous one. He is in prison for what happened in the last movie. And then the rest are just like, yeah, he's off somewhere
doing
jungle stuff.
I disagree with that totally, but let's go on to the next movie, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'm saving my comments on First Blood when we get to it. But next up on the list, right in the middle of the series of our ranking at number 3, we've got Rambo 4, 2008, Rambo. The names of these movies are dumb. This is Rambo 4. Fuck it, Rambo 4, next on the list.
Yeah. I'll kick it off, I guess.
All right.
This was my second favorite Rambo 4, John
Mine
Rambo,
too.
whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And there were two decisions that were tough on this making this list, which was choosing Rambo 2 or Rambo 3. Would that be the 4 or 5? And then Rambo 4, Rambo 5, would that be the 2 or the 3 for me? And as I rewatched them, the one thing I love about Rambo is that it was directed by Stallone. And I think the directing on this one is really good. It looks amazing. There's some great shots. I think Stallone is really a really good director. Once again, co-writing this screenplay, he co-wrote every Rambo film. And this really surprised me when it came out. There's a lot of excitement around this movie at this time because he had just revisited the Rocky character for Rocky Balboa, right? First time in 15 years. And now he was going to do another Rambo film after 20 years. So he's revisiting these two of my favorite characters, Rocky and Rambo, like as these guys approach like their old age, their senior citizen years, right? So I thought that was so great, and I love Rocky Balboa in the same way that I love this film. And when this film came out, I was working on cruise ships, like I said, so I was out of touch on new film releases and TV shows and shit. And I guess I would have been down in the Caribbean somewhere, and I saw a poster for Rambo. And it just looked fucking awesome. Like, it was like a shot of him with the rain, and his hair was long, and he had that big fucking machete knife, right? So awesome. So I didn't get to see it until I returned home, and I had the DVD release. But, it's so cool to see him at the beginning. They're catching snakes, in that boat scene where they get hijacked by the pirates, and he murders them all in like 5 seconds. Like, you see him actually eyeing up each of the guys. Like, that guy's got a gun in his waist. That guy's not looking around, so he's knowing like which order to kill these guys. So amazing, right? And This is like the quiet, contained, bottled up Rambo. He's dealing with all this anger and rage, and he's just doing his best to control it, right? Like, so you see him when he's driving the boat, and the mercenaries are like totally like getting up in his shit and trying to get something out of it. And he's just doing all he can do to contain himself, right? So, so great. And then what can we say about that epic final blood battle where he
metal. I've got the metal horns out right now.
Right, man. Like, he kills like almost 200 guys. Like that part where he just jumps on a Jeep with the gun turret, and he mows down the guy, the driver, just turning him into this red paste, right? And then he just starts taking people's body parts apart, like blowing legs off and heads apart, and the blood is like actually on the camera, right? Like, you see blood on the screen for this film, right? So amazing. Like, what can you say? And the final gutting of the main Burmese leader, that Major Tint guy,
his guts
Rambo
falling out.
Yeah, Rambo approaches him from behind, and you just see that like look in his face, and he basically cuts him in half, kicking the split torso down the hill. And then there's the shot of Rambo standing there, and he's grabbing his like shoulder because he just got shot, and everybody's like looking up at him, and just so great. I love this film, man.
And lest we forget him fucking ripping a rapist's neck off of him. Like,
that's right, man. It pulls his throat right out from him.
That's
and that's a
so
nod,
metal.
Clear nod to Swayze and Roadhouse, the original practitioner of that move. Also to be revisited in MacGruber later on. But make no mistake, that originated with Swayze and Roadhouse. Are you guys ever going to do a show about that? I'd like to.
I've never seen a Roadhouse.
You've never seen
None of them.
Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze?
I know of it, but I've never seen it.
I mainly know it for the soundtrack, which I know is
Guys. You've got to watch it, and we should have the four of us on again just for that movie.
Just for a single
that would
movie?
be- what a discussion that would be.
You know what? I'm cool with that. That'd be an easy episode to do. That's one movie, Steve.
They made a couple of Roadhouses, didn't they?
If they did, just pay attention to the first one, 1988. That's all you need.
Yeah, stellar cast. Swayze,
Wow.
you got Terry Funk, Jeff Healey.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's on my watch list. Admittedly, this has been a weird year for media consumption with all the little side projects and gigs I've involved myself with you know, doing the rebranding of the band, the weekly podcast, and doing that fucking film score that ate up like 3 months of my life this year. But it's been on the list for a while, Roadhouse, and I've seen clips. It looks fun. It's just like one of those things, just like you keep forgetting to get to it. But I mean, the soundtrack is killer, absolutely killer.
Well, Greg, you just mentioned score there, and just before we go any further, we haven't talked about the scores on these films, right? And you know, Jerry Goldsmith, who did the first three, was great, but then the last two films were scored by Brian Tyler, and I really love what he's done, incorporating some of Jerry Goldsmith's themes with the music on this, but also coming up with some new music ideas, which I have all the soundtracks for these movies. I love them. And there's this one theme that goes do 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 do, and they're like, that's playing like on the hill when Stallone's like just laid down the Burmese military there, right? So great music throughout all five of these films.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Jerry Goldsmith, one of the all-time greats in film scores, on that John Williams level. I think Tyler is very underrated in terms of film scores. I think he kind of flies under the radar for a lot of people, but I think he's definitely underappreciated, and I do think he's great. So, I mean, classic scores, the Rambo theme, obviously one of the iconic film themes of all time. So, for this movie, this is... like I said, I came at these as a modern viewer, coming at, the older Rambo films as movies that always existed when I was a kid, and this was the first new one. I had the same experience with you where I was really excited about Rocky Balboa, and so a new Rambo I was less excited about because I don't love the Rambo series the same way, but I was still definitely very interested and wanted Stallone to, keep that momentum of his career going. And so... this was great because it was Rambo with modern production values and just going full out for the gore, the blood, the violence. Like, it was, what Rambo I felt should have been the whole time, whereas, some of the action in the earlier movies, wasn't as bloody or brutal, even though dudes were exploding. Like, this was the gore fest that I felt Rambo always should have been.
Blood, lots of blood.
Lots of blood.
Yeah.
I thought that the supporting cast was actually pretty good in this one.
The mercenaries were all pretty cool.
The mercenaries had fun personalities, and the missionaries being kind of useless was pretty great.
Yeah.
Obviously there's the political message of, hey, you Christian missionaries, you are useless, just go in and fucking kill people, is I'm sure a message that Steve is about to refute and argue about. But I think that this is, in terms of political messages, I think this is one of the better neutral ones in the series because America didn't really have much of a stake in the Burmese Civil War. And so it was just Stallone saying, hey, there are these assholes doing these asshole things. I just want to shed awareness on this. And there are guys I can have Rambo kill without feeling guilty about it. So I think this one, in terms of politics, is one of the more neutral ones. And
Sure.
I enjoy this one quite a bit. I gave it 4 points out of a possible 5. So this second place for me.
Yeah, me too there. Yeah, we agree on that. Where is Burma? Burma's near, like, fucking Vietnam, right?
I believe, it's called Myanmar now, so I believe that
Myanmar?
is... Yeah, but I believe it is near Vietnam. I think it's like...
Near Thailand? Like,
more
north
like
of
Thailand, China.
Like, he's supposed to be in Thailand, right? And the missionaries want him to take the boat north to Burma. That's that's it?
Yeah, I believe so.
So, side tangent, the Roadhouse series, in fact, consists of Roadhouse, a direct-to-DVD sequel from 2006 called Roadhouse 2, an off-Broadway musical called Roadhouse, the stage version of the cinema classic that starred Patrick Swayze, except this one stars Timac from the 80s cult classic The Last Dragon, wearing a blonde mullet wig, and the cell phone footage of Erica Garner being choked to death.
Interesting.
Maybe not that last one, but that's the Wikipedia lists it.
You only need the first one, man. You're good.
Yeah,
You only need the first one.
exactly. So, should I go, or Steve, you want to go? Or
I mean, I'm happy to rant for a while.
Yeah, this is Steve's least favorite.
Yeah, this is the worst. This movie was
bad. second to least favorite for me, but you can go, Steve.
Yeah, okay, so, I think my favorite part of this movie was the underlying message that Doctors Without Borders are naive cowards and fools, and that the real solution to violence worldwide is American super soldiers. Yeah, that's basically it.
I'm sorry you're such a pussy, Steve.
Yeah, I don't know what movie you were watching. That's not the movie I saw.
The bit where a bunch of doctors, like they were legitimate doctors. They had medical training.
Sarah was actually a school teacher. She was just there because she was engaged to one of the doctors.
Yeah, okay, I guess, sure. But yeah, legitimately doctors were going in and attempting to provide medical aid, and the message was, those fools, those naive morons, they should not have done this. Now we need Rambo to kill everybody. Also, the sort of faces of death, actual corpse porn at the start of the film.
See, I understand your grievance with that, and I get it. I think using actual footage at the beginning of the film of corpses from the Civil War,
that was tasteless.
That could be argued that is in poor taste. I think that it is trying to get the message that this is a serious real world issue that should be paid attention to. But
then
also,
they shouldn't have done the rest of the movie. The rest of the movie is meant to be a fun bad guys exploding adventure. Like you shouldn't try to claim that the real world violence showed at the top of the film is meant to be repulsive and bad, whereas all of the rest of the fake violence throughout the rest of the film is fun and good.
Well, they're killing the bad guys, Steve, the guys who killed the children.
Yeah.
Yeah, violence is not fun and good, but revenge is. That's the purpose of Rambo, revenge, man. Come on.
You know what? There's a part of me that wants to disagree with that, like on an intellectual level, but the primal part of me is like, fuck yeah, Lee, you're right.
It is, man. Like,
well, who doesn't? How are you not picking up on the revenge themes in all of these movies? I mean, it's right there.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing that those are themes there, but they're just
primal,
like they're bad films that have conflicting internal messages. And
well, here's what I'll say, Steve. The idea that the missionaries are dumb for not bringing armed guards is valid. You go into a fucking war zone without armed guards. Yes, it's nice that you want to be a doctor, and you should go provide medical treatment. That part of the missionary statement is good, but yeah, you might have to fucking bring a gun with you. Like, that is part of life. Like, you go into a dangerous situation, you might have to... I'm from Cleveland, dude. I'm used to fights. Like, sometimes you just gotta be ready to fucking throw down if you need to.
So the film is fictional, though, so they can present these characters any way they want to, and they chose to present it as
they're pussies who won't bring a gun.
Pacifist doctors who are worthless versus Rambo. If they'd wanted to say, like, hey, make sure that you have protection if you're gonna, like, try to go do good in a war zone, then they could have presented that message.
They did. And they just said, we're not going to bring guns. And Rambo's like, well, you're a fucking idiot. Like, they do present that message.
Yeah, Rambo told him 4 times. Like, that chick had to, like, ask him 4 times before he was like, all right, I'm going to get her off my back. I'll drive you up the fucking river. Because she wouldn't stop leaving. She would go and camp out in his boat, like, trespass, and he's like, oh, this bitch again, man. Like, come on.
Yeah, but the thing with the bitch is that something about her he found attractive. And
see, I disagree with you, Chris. I disagree with you, Chris, on that one for sure. Because
then how do you explain?
She's not even the hottest girl from Dexter.
How do you explain his forlorn reaction at the end when she goes back to one of the pussies?
Rambo's got it bad. He's hot for teacher.
He made a gesture like shouldn't you come to my side because I saved your life? I didn't see that at all.
Oh, it's there at the end. I watched it again this morning.
Really? I'll have to take a look because she told him up front that they were engaged, and he gave her.
Yeah, but who gives a fuck about that? If you're interested in somebody, I don't give a damn about that.
See, I don't see Rambo as a guy looking for a love interest or feeling any kind of attraction.
I don't think he was either, but
it found him anyway.
It clicks in you, and it happens. So this is the fourth one on my list, and that whole engagement, his emotional engagement with Sarah, is what lifts it above Rambo 3, and is really the whole linchpin of the movie, because if these pussies come at him and there's no Sarah in the group, he doesn't bother with any of this at all. Okay, not just because she was the most relentless one out of them. It's like something about her generated an emotional reaction in him, and he wanted to help her out. He wanted to be part of her world. She's
the one that really pleaded with him, right? Like he was playing with his cobra snakes, and then like the little dweeb like asked him, and he flat out said no. And then Sarah came up to him 4 times, and I guess he kind of like he never had anyone connect. I don't know. I just don't see it, like the same way I don't see like a love relationship.
Rewatch the end. Rewatch the end. Just the scene just before he goes back to Arizona is tells it all to me. But anyway, that's what took it on a higher level than Rambo 3 for me. And, just again, there's a period of relentless action and violence that I, found viscerally appealing, of course. But I too agree that the storyline was probably the least interesting. The movie came out in 2008, 7 years removed from 9/11. So, I mean, obviously the story of the day was still, Middle Eastern terrorism, this and that, but there were still, a lot of people becoming aware of these, these ethnic injustices that were going on in that part of the world. And that's what he chose to address. I think he wisely sidestepped the whole 9/11 Middle Eastern terrorism topic.
Yeah, that would have been a really poor choice.
Yeah. And so he went with something else that was on people's minds. And, it was good. I enjoyed it, but, 4 out of 5 for me.
You ranked it higher than the author did. I'm flipping through the Wikipedia right now, and the guy who originally wrote First Blood gave it 3 stars. Yeah,
well, David Morrell he's a bit of a. I got problems with David Morrell, man. I don't really have much to concern for his opinion.
Oh yeah,
what I meant.
He wrote that great book, but like in his old age, he hasn't aged very well. So.
What I meant to say was that was the 4th favorite out of the 5 movies for me. I didn't mean to say it got 4 stars out of 5. But,
I just thought he looked cool too, man. Like that fucking hair wig was fucking badass, and he looked kind of big, like stockier. Like he wasn't like the skinny, ripped 80s Rambo. He's like this kind of big.
Yeah, he was huge.
Yeah, he's fucking huge. He's this. It's just so great, man. I love it. And we should say that this film was banned by the Burmese government, and
no way.
What? No.
You wouldn't think, right? But they wouldn't distribute the film. But what happened was, the film started popping up on the bootleg underground market, and there was these rebels in Burmese that they found this film, and they actually took this film and were inspired by this film, and they adopted that line, live for nothing or die for something, as rallying points and battle cries. And Stallone commented that that was one of the proudest moments he's ever had. That that happened. So
if you can incite a social revolution against a dictatorship, that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, man.
That's pretty fucking metal, Steve. I'm sorry. Smash the system, replace it with a larger, more oppressive system.
Right.
The other great line in that is the one, and I'm probably not getting it completely right, but you'll know what I'm talking about, is the one where he says, killing is natural, it's just a matter of how far you're pushed. And it really speaks to the carnality, the visceral notion of what Greg mentioned earlier about having family members, particularly a female family member, done violence to or a horrible crime to, that sort of explosive, violent, murderous reaction is inside of everyone. It's just a matter of, can you get to it? And like I said, I think the female character is a linchpin and is what just sets him off, as opposed to, had she not been part of that missionary group, I don't think he would have gotten involved in that mission at all, no matter how relentless they were about it. So
we'll see. The one thing I do like, though, is seeing Rambo fucking kill guys with a bow and arrow, which is so awesome, right? So there's that one scene where those guys are making the prisoners or whatever walk across the field that has like mine traps.
Sure.
And the mercenaries are like hiding out, and they're like can't believe what they're seeing. And all of a sudden, you see just these guys get obliterated with arrows, and it's fucking Rambo who showed up. He starts tearing these guys apart, right? So
and then that's when the Phil Collins looking guy, who's the missionary, the
Australian guy,
who thinks he's a fucking badass. It's like, who taught you to kill like that? At that moment, it's like, okay, dickhead, you're no longer in charge. I'm not just the boatman. I'm taking over.
And he pulls his bow out and puts an arrow half an inch from his eyeball and gives him this fucking speech, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Puts him right in his place.
That's one of my favorite sequences.
Yeah, but the Aussie guy was a bad motherfucker because he's got his leg busted off, right? And when the Burmese have them all lined up there, he's totally taunting them, and he's like, "Come on, you want to have a go at me? Have a go at me!" And the guy fucking puts that stick or whatever right in his busted leg, and he's just yelling in pain. Badass, man.
Yeah, once again, another, for me, the films just keep getting better and better. And speaking of getting better and better, next on the list, we have the film I ranked as number 1 in the franchise, Rambo: Last Blood.
Remember when that last movie had that whole bit about how landmines are bad? And then Rambo's just like, just put some landmines on my property.
Well,
neat.
Number 1, Craig?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Number one. So for me, the Rambo movies get progressively better. So it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in terms of my rankings, with 5 at the top. This is.
Well, let's hear it, Greg. You kick this one off, man.
Yeah.
Wait. So hold it a minute. So you're saying the first one is the worst of the Rambo movies?
We'll get to that in a minute.
We will discuss it when we get to it.
That's 5?
See, now you're just saying shit for the sake of doing it. You become like the Rambo and Rocky character is a caricature of yourself. This whole hot take persona has just consumed you, where you're just saying crazy shit for the sake of saying it.
So
hot takes.
I will actually. I will defend my indefensible stance on First Blood when we get to it.
Oh boy!
But in the meantime,
you kill me, bud.
And look, I fully acknowledge that it is bullshit because everyone else ranked that as number 1, and I'm the only person who didn't rank as number 1. But legitimately, I think that each Rambo film gets better as they progress. I won't talk about First Blood right now, but for me, what the Rambo films are, ultimately not very good story-wise, and all about how sweet is the action and the visceral response I get from the action. And for me, I thought that the action in Rambo 3 was better and the pacing in that movie was better. I thought that the action in 2008's Rambo was better than the previous Rambos because it had the gore and the modern technology. And this, in my opinion, is the best Rambo because it has the gore and the sick action of 2008's Rambo with a story and characters that I care about, where there is arcs, development, growth. I become attached to the characters and my heart breaks over the course of this movie. I think this is, like, the thing is, this is, out of all the Rambo movies, the one that has the potential to crack into my Stallone top 10. Oscar is on thin ice with this one. It's overtaking Rhinestone and Nighthawks for me. I fucking love this movie. The character of Gabrielle might actually be my favorite character in the franchise, just because I really
Speaking of fridges,
I resonate with her arc and her character, her motivations. They make sense to me. And seeing what she goes through is just this really poetic Shakespearean tragedy that is just heartbreaking to see. And then to see, Rambo go off on this murderous revenge quest. First just, trying to rescue her from, what he knows was a mistake. And then, when she dies and, you really feel like she didn't get proper closure. And that she did have so much life and so much she had left to fulfill. To have someone be, raped, tortured, murdered, his revenge quest is visceral. It's primal. It makes sense. The movie took a lot of time to make sure you grew to like that character and care about that character, that her relationship with Rambo was believable. And also, this is a film where Rambo makes mistakes. He doesn't make the right tactical decisions to rescue her right away. And because of his mistakes, she dies and he has to live with that. But also he just goes on this brutal revenge quest with great action set pieces, fucking awesome song by The Doors playing in the background.
Hey, Greg, before we continue, can we discuss what the relationship is between Rambo and Gabrielle and the grandma at the ranch? Because I tried to figure this out, but I'm still not sure.
I believe, so the grandma at the ranch is Gabrielle's aunt, I believe. And I believe her mother and father worked on the ranch for Rambo's dad. And then when Rambo took over the ranch, they still worked for him. And he sort of looked after Gabrielle like a daughter. So he was like an uncle, father figure because the father was a piece of shit. And so he just took care of her over the last decade, grew up, she grew up around him. And he just became very protective of her. So
Because he calls her his goddaughter at some point, right?
Yeah, well,
she calls him Uncle John.
Yeah, she calls him Uncle John. And then at one point when he's looking for her and someone asks, what's she to you? He says, she's my daughter. I think that's how he views her.
Yeah, but he's just saying that just to say who she is, what the gravitas of it.
Right.
But the other thing I noticed, too, when he's standing at her grave, did you notice the other gravestones? Now, I'll have to really look at this better when I go see this movie for a second time. But it looked like one of the other gravestones was Helga Rambo or something like that. Now, would that be Rambo's mom or would that be Gabrielle's mother?
I think that'd be Rambo's mom, but you know what? I don't know. Room for sequels after Rambo rides off into the sunset. But yeah, this movie is everything I wanted from a Rambo movie that I never thought I would get, because I thought Rambo movies for me would always be kind of shitty stories with visceral action. This is the first one where, it's a tragic story, but I love the story, and it makes the action have so much more of an impact at the end, where I'm just fuck yeah, Rambo, rip out that dude's still beating heart. Which is
Kalima!
Which is the ultimate My Chemical Romance Rambo hybrid I didn't know I wanted for years. But yeah, I adore this movie. And this movie has subsequently made me like the entire Rambo franchise much more. Where I was yeah, these are fine. Where I'm just you know what? Fuck yeah, Rambo. Rambo's fucking great. So this movie just elevates the franchise so high for me. I sincerely love this the best. It's not a hot take. This is sincerely my favorite Rambo movie. And I was surprised, and I was joking with Steve, man, wouldn't it be the worst if this ranked in the middle for me? Or if it wasn't my number one Rambo? Because he knew that I liked them more and more as the series progressed. And I thought, there's no way this is going to be my favorite. I just thought there's no way, and I just have to concede that hot take wouldn't happen. And then it just sincerely was my favorite, and I love this movie.
Wow.
So, looking at some fun statistics, so far, this movie has grossed about half of what Downton Abbey has.
Yeah, what? All right, whatever,
Your point is what?
I just think it's funny. Like, the big dumb action blockbuster is, made about 50 million worldwide, and Downton Abbey has cleared 100. The period drama.
What Downton Abbey is.
It's based off a TV show.
It's based off a PBS show.
It's like a rom-com or something.
It's a period drama.
It's like a very British drama where they're just like, oh, we're so British, talking about British things back in the Victorian days. So British.
Right?
Yeah.
How could we possibly continue to be rich landowners when we are incompetent landowners? And all we've had are daughters. How will we marry them off to rich men?
All right, let's derail this back into Rambo's of that pussy bullshit.
Rambo. So
and look, I fucking love Wuthering Heights, so I'm into that shit too. But like, let's save that for another day.
You know what I love about this movie, though? I love that there's actually like kind of a legitimate motive on this one that you don't get in some of the other Rambo movies, where like he's actually
a woman dies.
Well, he's
that
had
never
loved
happens.
ones, legitimate loved ones, like really tragically died. Like this was this. I like cried at that part where Gabrielle died in the truck. Like I didn't see that coming. When he saved her from the whorehouse and he's driving back in the truck and she's like just hanging on by a thread. And he's talking about like the last 10 years of his life and how he thought he never could, have something that he cared for. And he watched her grow up and how he was so proud of her. And then she like dies as she says a tear and he pulls the fucking truck over. Man, I was fucking crying in the theater, man. I'm like, that's like intense shit, right? So then, the stakes are high on this one. Like he's actually fighting for and seeking revenge for loved ones. And I like this film because it shows an aging hero who just seriously still can't seem to escape the war inside him and the raging PTSD. The one thing though, I wish he would have had long hair. Like the one thing, like that hair, like his short hair. Like it reminded me of like Rocky Balboa, like killing all these guys, and I wish he would have had like a little bit of hair at the back of his head, a lot of long hair, maybe a headband at one point, So what else?
I was really disappointed that they actually killed Gabrielle. I thought that like she was a great potential source of like real character development and real discussion of what is going on in these movies. Like Rambo is sort of a caricature of himself, really. But like Gabrielle,
what do you mean by that?
Just like I don't know. He's a caricature of action stars at this point. Just like everything is over the top. He's a superhero.
He is the action star. Rambo is the action star. Like
right.
Everyone else came after him. Like
so, like nothing that happens to Rambo is really of consequence. But what happens to Gabrielle is of consequence. So what they do is they take this, this young woman who has her entire life ahead of her, and they put her in this incredibly traumatic experience, and then very pointedly, they scar her face. Like, they leave her with physical marks to reflect what has happened on here. If they had sent her home and said, now she has to live the rest of her life with these physical and emotional scars, there's real impact to that. There's real meaning to that. But instead they were like, and then she dies so that the big bad superhero man has enough motivation to kill all the bad people. And that was a real bummer to me.
Well, see, the way I look at it...
I don't know. I disagree with that.
Yeah, because I look at it as, you as the viewer are rooting for her to survive, and you think with the scar that she will survive and have to deal with that for the rest of her life. And so, like, I think Lee hit a really great point where you didn't know during that car ride whether or not she would live or die. And you were really on the edge of your seat, and I think it was a bold decision to let the character die. Because, if it was a Taken movie, the character would have lived. And I think it's the fact that you didn't know as the viewer what was going to happen added genuine suspense to the movie. Because in a lot of these action movies, the hero is going to win. But you don't know that Rambo is going to lose someone important to him, necessarily.
Well, they set it up in the early scenes when she's having that party in Rambo's tunnels. And she says, like, Uncle John, I thought you were cool with everything. And he tells her, like, He goes, no, I'm not cool. I just got like a bottle on the lid, and I'm just like waiting for something to pull the bottle off, the top off, right? And this is the thing that flips that switch that we talked about earlier, right? And then he just goes fucking nuts and just takes down 100 guys.
Right.
Right?
Yes, she's the linchpin again, much like Sarah in the fourth one, but on a much more personal level. And I'm glad you mentioned that line. The line is, I haven't changed, I'm just trying to keep a lid on it, which I think is one of the greatest lines in the whole franchise. And then the way he lures them back to their demise in this this cauldron of death he's prepared for them, and they just come waltzing into it thinking that they're just going to wipe this guy out, and he just systematically eradicates all of them is simply incredible.
He fought them on their turf, and then he brought them to his turf where he had the advantage.
Yeah, and just I thought that was great. I totally agree with you guys, and we all seem to have different reactions to it, but the Gabrielle's death is definitely something that, however you feel about it, takes you aback. You're not fully expecting it, and it's something certainly not on a superficial level like his war baby girlfriend in part 2. This is way different level.
Right. Somebody he actually has known for some amount of time and cares about.
And someone who got a good amount of screen time being developed with her own story. Like, it wasn't just her story was just tied to Rambo. She had her own arc with her father, which was tragic in its own right.
I did like how they handled the father's arc, and that, like, he's in 2 scenes, one of which is like, I don't care, you can fuck off, and then the second scene is Rambo showing up, but like, I still don't care, she fucked off.
And we talk about the direction by Sly, where he has that heavy scene where she dies in the truck, and he's pulled over to the side of the road. But no, he's gonna like stick that dagger in your heart a little bit more, because he's gonna show the scene where he drives up to the ranch with her dead body in the passenger seat, and the ant comes out, right? And John goes out and trying to stop the ant, but she like goes to see the body, and it's just this other like wave of emotion hits you too, right? To further make that count, that scene.
Well, and absolutely, that whole sequence is the most poignant stuff in the whole franchise, certainly since the first movie for me. So.
But I said directing. He didn't direct this one though. He did screenplay, right? Who directed this movie? Some Andre guy or something.
Adrian Grunberg.
Adrian, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You Adrian.
But I had this. Yeah, there you go. I had this third on my list. I think again my theory about the female linchpins. This one was the most significant of them all, which is why it ranked higher than the fourth movie for me. And again, I love that line. I haven't changed. I'm just trying to keep a lid on it. That's something that resonates with me on a personal level. And now the other stuff that's being talked about nowadays is the whole Mexican border thing. There's some of the scuttlebutt about the movie is about tying it back to some sort of support
for Trump, saying it's Trumpian propaganda, even though the screenplay was written like a decade ago.
Right? If they just had a wall, none of this movie would have happened.
Well, damn it, Steve.
But when you think
Gabrielle would have been stuck on the American side. What would she have done?
Well, but there's there's a lot of questions that aren't necessarily as significantly tied to that verse. Like, it's like, how is Rambo getting back and forth over the border when they took his driver's license? How is he getting through the border with no ID?
Also,
how is a caravan of killers coming charging into Arizona demise without any of them being stopped at the border? And then the scene where obviously he crashes through the fence at the border, and
right, yeah. So Rambo jumped the border. Clearly, everybody's doing that a lot.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of the scuttlebutt, and that's like the tie-in with the modern political climate. But in general, I enjoyed it, and like I said, of the right in the middle for me, and I thought it was well done. And
I definitely winced at that part where he pulled that dude's collarbone out at the club.
Oh, that was fucking metal.
Holy shit, man. I'm like, oh, this movie's going to a new level. He fucking pulled the guy's collarbone out and he's twisting information out of him.
Yeah, it was pretty hardcore. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, shoves his knife into his thigh beforehand, right?
Yeah, you fucked that guy up good.
And you get like a little bit of a Rocky training montage, but this time it's
a
like
killing montage.
Rambo is setting the traps, right?
The Home Alone prep montage.
I was kind of hoping for a Burt Young cameo at that stage. That would have been fun.
Yeah, one of the things, Chris was touching on about the political nature of this film. This film has gotten a lot of negative press. People saying that the film is racist and pro-Trump propaganda.
Snowflakes.
Yeah, I don't think it's any secret that I am a, left-leaning moderate of the millennial generation. So obviously I have some liberal tendencies, and I think those pussies are reading way too much into this movie.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm the same way. Like, I'm definitely like, liberal leaning left-sided myself, but like, it's a fucking movie, man. It's Rambo.
Well, the whole racism thing. It's like, come on. It's like, are you telling me there are no outlaws in Mexico? There are no hood rats like the friend of Gabrielle, who kind of sets this whole thing off by taking her to that club where she's drugged, and the whole sequence of sex trafficking and enslavement starts. It's like, you're telling me those types of people don't exist, that if you depict those characters as Mexicans, it's racist. I mean, it's just, that's like Troyan-esque saying shit for just the sake of saying.
Well, let me defend something with Troyan-esque statements. I think the fact that Rambo's like the one white character in the movie.
Yeah, after that party at the beginning, he's the
only
white character.
Guy. The only one. Yeah, the guy that tries to creep up on Gabrielle is the other white guy. But besides that, it's Rambo and a bunch of Mexicans.
And the thing is, the good characters are Mexican, and so are the bad characters. The reporter is a Mexican. Gabrielle is, of Mexican descent. Her aunt is a Mexican. And then the villains are Mexican. It's just like, there's good people and there's bad people. And just the bad guys are bad, the good guys are good guys. It just so happens that some of the good guys are Mexican, some are bad. And I've read actual complaints by journalists saying that Rambo didn't kill any white people in the movie. Right. And I'm like, look, he killed white people in 2 other movies in the franchise. He mixes it up.
Right. I think and the whole way that the movie unfolded reminded me of No Country for Old Men a little bit, and it's also like, so was that a racist movie because there were Mexican thugs, kicking off this whole sequence of events? It's so stupid. It's just, people are just looking for ways to be outraged and looking for ways to tie everything in with the sensitive topics of the day.
I mean, the portrayal of Mexico itself, like not necessarily any particular characters, but Mexico itself is sort of problematic in that, like,
but
the only parts of Mexico we see are crime-infested shitholes. Like, that is all of Mexico that exists.
Yeah, but that's where she's going. That's where her dad lives.
Right,
man.
and
that's
that is
area she's going to.
This is what it's like on the other side of the border. Like, when you're going like to Cancun or some shit where it's nice, it's a lot different than right over the border where the cartels are, which are a thing. Now,
I'm sure when Gabrielle was driving from Arizona to Mexico, she passed through some nice neighborhoods where there were Burger Kings and some nice like Gap outlet malls and stuff like that. But then when she wanted to find her father, he lived in this like shithole area of Mexico, which I'm sure exists. So that's where all this shit went down.
See, they could have shown those nicer neighborhoods, and it would have been
how
more
boring
nuanced.
Of a movie that is.
It would have been.
She drove past the Gap. And if you're cutting for time to make a movie snappy, the scene where the character drives past a Gap and nothing happens, you could probably cut from a Rambo movie.
Pays for itself, and that's the product placement and a more nuanced, less problematic portrayal of Mexico. So many problems solved.
That's the one good thing about all the Rambo movies too. They're a tight 90 minutes. They don't go on to 3 hours like fucking adventurous movies. It's a tight 90 minutes.
Unlike this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, we're at like 100 minutes right now.
Longer than each movie.
All right, let's wrap it up.
Yeah, but real quick, I will mention that I guess there was like 20 minutes of footage that was cut from the beginning of the U.S. release of this, which we'll probably see on DVD later. But there's an entire intro sequence that we didn't get.
Ooh.
He's on a horse in the rain, and he rescues some people in a river.
Yep.
And apparently one of them dies as he's doing it or something like that.
I mean, it sounds completely unrelated to the rest of the movie, so it's probably fine that it got cut, but I know that Lee and I will love it when we get it on DVD.
Fuck yeah. And it's kind of funny that he turned his dad's ranch into a fucking battlefield, eh? Like, do you think Robert Rambo or whatever his name was is like looking down going, you fucked up my ranch. You blew it up, man. Made all these tunnels, and then you blew the fucking place all apart.
I put a lot of time and money into those horses, and you're just going to send them away?
No, he's going to ride off into the sunset.
Oh, right. Yeah, he does ride off into the sunset.
But that's the one thing I wanted to mention, too, is like, I didn't see that last final end credit scene.
You didn't stick around for the post-credit scene?
Okay, Chris, I hope you're with me on this, man, but I don't know how to fucking watch movies anymore. Like, I grew up with credits at the start of the movie, right? And then the movie would end, and the credits would roll, and you would fucking leave the theater. Now you don't know whether to stay for the end of the movie because there could be this, like, little 5-second stupid scene at the end of the credits. So you have to sit there in the theater like an idiot, like, I'm going to wait to see if there's a final scene. And then if there's not, like the movie has got you and you feel like a goof walking out there like, I just wasted another 4 minutes with these credits.
Or you look it up online before you go see the film.
Yeah, that's typically the way to do it.
I'm not going to do that, though. So the final scene on this is that like, he gets on a horse and he rides off into the sunset. Is that what it is?
It's pretty fucking
It really
great.
is that.
I thought it was rad as shit.
But I thought he sent all the horses home. Like, there was that scene where he's in the...
he's got one left.
And he opens it up and he's like, get on out of here, right?
To be fair, he's at their home. The horses are at home at the ranch, so presumably they wander back a while later after they stop smelling smoke and blood in the air.
Yeah. What about that final kill scene, though, eh?
The heart?
Yeah, where he sets it up where he's testing his bow and arrow, like shooting the cards, right? And he hits every, like, one of the cards, like, right. And then finally the Martinez brother, who he saved last. I could have killed you.
You could have killed you 10 times.
But I saved you for last because I want you to feel this death, right? So then he like fucking pins him to the barn with like 4 arrows, and then the slow walk.
I've got the devil horns out. Oh,
he unsheathes the fucking knife, right? And you just see that look from like Martinez's POV as like the bloodied face of Rambo walks up there. He fucking holds the knife like above his head and he gouges it into his chest, gutting this motherfucker, pulling his heart out like Mola Ram from Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, right? Like the thuggy high priest. And like he lets him see his heart in his hand, crushing it before he dies. Oh, it's so great. Come on, man.
Yeah, so the entire theater that we were in was laughing at that sequence.
It was hilarious.
So
But I fucking loved it. As like a guy who I like Shakespeare quite a bit, which is very over the top and silly and operatic. But I
love it too. I'm laughing the whole way, but I'm smiling. I love it, man.
But yeah, there's a Shakespearean edge to that I really like. This entire story was very Shakespearean. Rambo: Last Blood, and so.
Yeah, I remember the scene in Midsummer Night's Dream when Puck pulls the dude's heart out with his bare hands.
Yes, I know you're referencing the comedy. Dude, Macbeth. Like, you know Macbeth is a thing, right? Fucking A.
Oh, great.
Ruining Greg's commentary with hot takes.
What a guy.
Speaking of hot takes, do we have any other comments on Last Blood before we move on to the number 1 film in the ranking?
This is actually the second best one. It's the only other one this one and First Blood are the only ones I think should actually exist.
The cool part of him like setting up the doors 5-1 to play as he's going to mow these guys down, right?
Such a great play. Yeah, it's so great. First of all, I love The Doors, and I love that song. So I was just like, "Fuck yeah, 5-1, hell yeah, Rambo: Last Blood."
Chris, you guys know the Ace Frehley connection to that song?
I want to. It's ringing a bell, but I can't verbalize it.
That's where Ace got the guitar solo for "She."
Oh, right. That's it.
So you hear that. Yep. You hear that little lick while Rambo is cutting guys' heads off in the tunnels there with his knife, right?
See, I thought we were going to go for some kind of like, the Ace Frehley covered it with the Doors, and it was a 1,000,005 to 1.
He wasn't on that album.
Yeah, good one.
Oh, well.
That would have been Vinnie Vincent. But, you know what? Bless you for trying, buddy.
Right? Somebody needs to make those jokes every episode.
And then Pearl Jam ripped that off on I'm Alive. They ripped that Carlick up too, right? Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to go through the ranking from the bottom to the top. Rambo 3 at the bottom, followed by First Blood Part 2 Rambo, followed by Rambo, followed by Rambo Last Blood. But the best film in the Rambo franchise, according to this panel of experts and me, First Blood, which I ranked at the bottom.
Yep, explain yourself, Greg.
Yeah, why did you rank this at the bottom?
Yeah, you go first, Greg, because you're way out of line on this.
Yeah, this is my least favorite film in the Rambo franchise, in that I feel a strong disconnect from this film and all of the other ones. I'm not much into the thriller genre, which this film kind of fits into. And I've seen Stallone do better thrillers, Nighthawks being the example that immediately comes to mind. For me, I don't buy Rambo as a character in this movie, and I think I don't buy it as chapter 1 in this character's story. When I look at all of the films together as a franchise, this one stands out because, he's struggling with a bunch of hillbilly cops, where later on he can take on the entire Russian army. And so there's a disconnect with me there.
Yeah, but that's not the struggle, though, man. That's not the struggle. The struggle is to not kill them. You could kill them in you could kill them in 5 seconds.
He killed one person.
The struggle is to keep that bottle on the cap on the bottle.
The trick is he doesn't want to kill white people, Greg.
He killed one person, and he didn't even mean to do it.
Exactly.
And I get that, and also I think the fact that he is the physique changes so much between this one and the second one, where that became like the norm of just Rambo being this fucking huge dude versus him being kind of lean in this one.
Yeah, that's because he went to jail for 3 years and he had nothing to do but lift weights.
Right.
So it makes sense. It's true.
But so the thing is, I think the movie starts off very strong for me, and it's like the dramatic beats between him and the police officers actually work very well up until he escapes from jail, and then the movie just gets kind of boring for me, where I'm just not super into the action sequences, and it's just I think Troutman is great, and his speech at the end is good, but honestly, they're the least impressive action sequences in the franchise for me. I don't feel as much suspense during them, and because I don't find the character particularly engaging in this film, and I don't find his arc particularly engaging, it feels out of place in the franchise for me, and is sincerely my last place in the franchise because it's the one I enjoy the least. It's the one that feels most out of place, and honestly, I think I would like the Rambo franchise better if it didn't exist, because I always view it as the first chapter in the story and being like, yeah, this fucking crazy cop killer eventually became a super soldier and saved the world. So
he didn't kill one cop. He
killed one cop by accident.
He threw a rock.
Everybody else's life.
He threw a rock that hit the windshield of a helicopter. The helicopter spun out, and because this dumbass cop was hanging out the window, he fell out. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't his fault.
Crazed cop killer.
Look, would this movie be
you could be a modern journalist with that take on what's happened in the movie.
I mean, this movie would be a lot better if there was a Body Count song playing in the soundtrack.
No.
This movie
he didn't kill one cop, man. And he didn't break any laws until he started busting into the ammo store at the end and started blowing up gas stations and shit like that.
I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to assault cops even if they are abusing you.
I know they drew First Blood, not
They'll
him.
Still prosecute you for that.
It's just
they drew First Blood. They drew First Blood.
His legs. No legs, Lieutenant Jet.
But the thing is, this adventure feels beneath Rambo as a character, as I've come to know him in like the cultural zeitgeist. Me, seeing images of Rambo 2 and 3 just growing up and just assuming that's what the Rambo franchise is. And then going back to this one, it feels awkward and out of place. And it's a genre of film I don't particularly care for. It's not my thing. And it's the only of all the Rambo movies, this is the only one I don't own on DVD, aside from the one that's still in theaters.
Oh, boy.
Fun little bit of trivia about this one is if you go back and look at number 4, at one point he's having his flashbacks, and they do a flashback to Rambo First Blood. They show the original version of it where he gets shot at the end.
Yeah, that one shot.
Which is all kinds of interesting. Like, that was the best moment in that film, I think.
No,
was
that's
the moment that they took from the original version of First Blood.
Well, that's how the book ends. That's how the book ends. Right, yeah. But, yeah, Greg, you're way the fuck out of line on this, man. I don't know where to start with this. This is a gritty, like, 70s style action movie, man. And it's so great. Directed by Ted Kotcheff, who's a Canadian, by the way, who directed Uncommon Valor and Weekend at Bernie's.
Written by a Canadian, too.
Yeah, 2 great films. Yeah, written by David Morrell's Canadian?
Yeah.
Wow. And we talked about the score earlier with Brian Tyler, but let's talk about Jerry Goldsmith for a bit with this score, which is so great. Jerry Goldsmith, that theme, "It's a Long Road," which Dan Hill, another Canadian, he sang the lyric version over the credits, but that little melody is Jerry Goldsmith. And this movie was filmed in Hope, BC. But like I said when I was prefacing how I got into the character in the franchise, is that weekend where I rented this on VHS, and I must have watched it about 5 or 6 times that entire weekend. It was so great. I immediately wanted a survival knife with a compass and all that shit in the handle, That part where he jumps off the cliff, right? And he falls through the trees, and his arm gets all cut up. And they show him, like, stitching his arm up himself. Like, what a badass, right? Like, just little shots like that. Great acting at the end where he breaks down in front of Troutman. And he just kind of loses it for this first thing, for the first time in the movie, right? Like, there's barely any dialogue by Stallone in this entire film until the very end where he just kind of pours it out. He throws down his gun, and that little scene where he kind of tugs at Troutman's coat. And he pulls him close, and he leans him in there for a hug, right? And like, I got tears in my eyes when I'm watching this film.
Well, people make fun of that scene, but that scene is actually a very poignant and on point,
right? It's legitimately good
illustration of PTSD.
Exactly, yeah, and great acting by Sly, man. He's a great actor, man. Like, he's just encompassing the character and.
Yeah, I mean, it's a legit movie by any measure, in my opinion. Brian Dennehy.
I guess unless you're talking about just how much ultra-violence is in it, Greg.
I mean, yeah,
it's a great film with, like, real message and good acting and subtlety and pacing. But, yeah, sure, there's not a ton of murder.
And that's why Last Blood is better.
No, the thing where he... okay, listen to here. I'll parallel those First Blood and Last Blood. Okay, the thing where he sets the traps for the cops that are coming after him in the forest, right? And he's setting these traps that are gonna like shove like tree spikes into the guy's legs. They're not gonna kill him, but they're gonna disable him, right? So, and then he finally goes up to Dennehy. He grabs him against a tree. He puts his blade to his throat, and he's like, "I could have killed everyone, but I didn't. Just back off me, man. Just let me be. Back off me. Stop pushing." Right? Like, because you're going to, like, take the cap off this bottle. And that's what he's fighting for this whole movie until he finally, when they send, like, a bazooka in his cave that he made, that's when he kind of, that's when the cap comes off the bottle and he just fucking, decides to take the town down.
Yeah. I mean, and like you said, that sequence where he finally emerges from that sort of
booby trap thing, yeah.
Yeah, that whole like network of tunnels or whatever he found himself in, and when he commandeers the the army vehicle. From then on out, it's just the mayhem he causes by blowing up the gas station and then detonating the outpost and all that stuff, and just shooting up the police station is a sequence of about good 20-30 minutes that's just 100% adrenaline for me. And then Brian Dennehy is incredible. He's the equivalent of Charles Napier for me in the first one. And again, it wraps up with a very poignant and well portrayed depiction of PTSD, which is on everybody's radar nowadays. And it's a legit movie across the board, much like the I think they all are, but most naysayers will say, similar to the Rocky franchise, well, the first one was really good, and then it became a caricature and everything over the top and stuff. And that's
fine, the arm wrestling movie.
I mean, if you're gonna quote me, just use my name, though.
Right.
But I don't think you have the other four movies if you don't have this first movie to set up the character. I think this is essential to the series, Greg. Like, I think you need this to set up, like, this is where it kind of all started. And this is, like, from the very first moment where he's walking down that hill to find his old buddy from the army, Delmar Barry, right? And
that's a great scene.
And then he finds out that he died of cancer from Agent Orange or whatever from his mama. And then it's just like he just walks... Yeah. He just walks back up the hill with just like more just desolation.
And also keep in mind that he's in civilian America at that time. When he goes in part 2, when he's released from prison to go back into Vietnam, into the war zone, he clicks back into becoming the killing machine that he was as a soldier.
Well, I think the difference is, Rambo 2 and Rambo 3 and largely Rambo 4. Those are basically superhero movies, except his superpower is guns.
Sure.
So Rambo is basically a superhero. First Blood is a character study, but the problem is the amount of the film that is a character study, for me, is very limited. It's like once you get into the middle where it's all about the chase and the action, it loses me because I don't find those action sequences particularly engaging, especially when I'm coming at it from the perspective of the entire series.
Yeah, but that's still a character study, man. That's not like, it doesn't have to be an action sequence. It's Rambo making these choices. Like, first he's running away, then he's just trying to get these guys to, like, scare them off, and then he decides to take them down. It's like a 3-act thing.
But I guess, like, so some of the... Rambo in his violence in the other films always seemed to have a deliberate purpose for his violence. And he didn't just, like, blow up shit for the sake of blowing up shit. Like, he had a reason for blowing up shit. So him just blowing up random civilian businesses didn't seem to be in character with what I saw in later films, where he always had a bit more tactical nuance to what he was doing.
Greg, he learned to hate capitalism over in Nam.
No comment.
I think he was trying to blow up something where he knew he wasn't going to hurt any civilians. Like, this is probably like, I don't know what time of the night it was, but there was obviously nobody on any of the streets. He blows up a gas station. There's no civilians going to get hurt by any of his damage. Same with the
outpost.
The outpost, the gun shop or whatever. And he's just using that as a distraction to kind of lure, Teasel to see where he is so he can sneak up on him, right?
Right. And then when he shoots up the police station, I mean, there's all manner of possibility for stray bullets to go flying through someone's window. And, it's
rage, but he doesn't try to kill him, right? Like he's
right. That's not his primary intent.
Yeah,
is what you're saying.
If any civilians die, it's an accident, just like in Vietnam.
Steve, what's your take on it?
No, like, this is the best Rambo film. I, like everybody who has any sense of cinema at all, ranked this as the top film in the series.
And why exactly? I mean, I know you touched on some of that.
Yeah, I mean that it's a real study in what the United States was like trying to recover from the Vietnam War, and like It's got a real character who's actually trying to work through real challenges instead of just a superhero who solves every problem with, bigger guns and ignoring injuries.
What I would say is, for me, this is very much a film of its time, in which there are a lot of these like really angsty dramas with sort of like these neurotic, dark main characters. A film I watched for the first time this year that I didn't really like at all was Taxi Driver, where I see some parallels between the two movies. In that,
you didn't like Taxi Driver?
I don't like Taxi Driver. I
agree with Greg on that one. Taxi Driver is not a great film.
I think that Taxi Driver was a bunch of bullshit without an actual message at the end.
Yep.
First Blood is like similar to it, where I feel like the message isn't like very clearly defined, other than like, hey, PTSD sucks, but it doesn't like give a next step as to like moving forward or like working with it. It's just saying this is a problem, which is a better message than Taxi Driver, which has no message. I'm sorry, go ahead.
End the movie. You have to end the movie at some point.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, this could just be an entertaining chapter, which it actually is when you look at the Rambo trilogy. This is an entertaining chapter. But at the time, in 1982 or whatever, when it came out, it's just like, let's put this 100-minute film out. This will be entertaining, right? And it definitely fucking was. Wow.
Well, I guess if you're gonna try to have a film with a message, I want you to like go through with it and actually make a statement. And I felt like the film wasn't making, it did make a statement in that we treat veterans like shit and that's fucking terrible. But I felt that there was more it could have said. Oh, sorry.
Greg, what if this was the only film in the franchise and it ended with Rambo being shot? Would you have a better opinion of it?
Yes. If this was the only film in the franchise and it ended with Rambo being shot, I would have a better opinion of it. And if it was actually a completely separate character, so let's just say his name, he had a different last name, and then the Rambo series was a separate series of movies, I would probably like this better. But I think the disconnect of where I see the character going, I just can't wrap my head around. And the ending of the film was just like, yeah, and then he just went to jail. Bum.
If they shot him at the end of this one and then retconned that out for the rest, how would you feel about that?
What else is he going to do after all the crimes he committed? Of course he's going to go to jail.
But what I'm saying is, it felt like, he should have died at the end for it to, have a stronger narrative impact. And just like
Why though? He didn't kill anybody, really. He doesn't deserve to die. He's a fucking war hero.
Well, I guess
in
the book, he does kill more characters than in the film version.
All right,
so I'm about the book. But yeah, looking at just the film version, I think that just like it doesn't feel like there's any character resolution with him going to jail. It's just like, well, I kind of fucked that up. I should have just let the cops treat me like shit and then left town.
So what are you going to do? What are you going to have another hour and a half about his fucking life in jail? You have to end the movie.
Rambo 2, he gets treatment for his mental health issues and becomes a productive member of society.
There's not a happy ending. There's not always a happy ending.
Would you rather have Rambo 2 had been more like regarding Henry? I mean, what the fuck are you talking about?
First of all, thank you for dropping a regarding Henry reference on this show. That's tremendous.
It's the only connection I can make. This is just baffling.
What I would say is, the original,
and you're putting me in a bad mood for Spa Night. By the way, I need to.
Don't worry. Once you get that table shower, it'll all go away.
The other thing too about this film was that there was more dialogue for Rambo's character in the screenplay, but Sly actually cut it out, and he thought he'd be more better for the character to speak less and just have his eyes and his action.
Well, and the other thing that we all know goes on in movies that touches on the fact of what you just mentioned, touches on the fact of how he wasn't shot at the end of Rambo 1, touches on the fact that we didn't get those 20 minutes at the beginning of Last Blood, is these movies go through test audiences, focus groups. They report back what they like, what they don't like, and they make adjustments.
I guess the original cut of the film was like 3 hours long, and they cut a lot from it.
But I guarantee you, all the things we mentioned were adjusted as a result of being shown to a test audience.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll guarantee you a test audience saw the original cut with Rambo being shot at the end, and they were like, I hated that. They had like the opposite
stupid
reaction
test
of Greg
audience.
and saying, I hated this.
You invest all this emotion in the character from like minute one of the film, and then like 95 minutes later they're going to kill the guy, and you got to walk out of the theater. That doesn't feel good, right?
So that's the X factor that we all know goes on in between the first cut of a movie and what actually gets shown. I mean, Apocalypse Now is another example of, the director's cut was something that didn't make it to the original theater because test audiences hated it.
Yeah, and look, I will acknowledge, like, there are a lot of my hot takes where I think that I am completely correct on them and don't understand the rest of the world's opinion. But this is one of the one where I can see why everyone else disagrees with me, but in the same way that, Chris, you don't care for the song Love Gun, and it just doesn't grab you on a visceral level, this one it doesn't grab me on a visceral level. I enjoy every other film in the franchise more. I enjoy Cobra more. I enjoy Rocky V more than this one. Every Rocky film defeats this one for me. It doesn't do it for me. I think the beginning of the film... Man.
What about that motorcycle car chase, like Dukes of Hazzard thing? Like they got like camera shots of like the cop cars, like jumping over the cameras, and then they go into the forest, and like Rambo's driving his dirt bike up the cliff and stuff like that. Oh, it's
not
great.
as good as the stick fight at the beginning of Rambo 3. Not as good as him ripping out a rapist's throat, or fucking ripping out a dude's heart, or hanging a dude and then the dude exploding, or him jumping out of an exploding boat, or him shooting a guy with a bow and arrow and the dude exploding. It is not better than any of those moments.
What about the part where they're trying to fingerprint Rambo and he's just like not being cooperative, and he's just like, I'm not fucking fingerprinting him. They're trying to force fingerprint him. Right?
No, that's fun. And I'm saying, like, I think everything before him escaping from prison is a really good, well-paced drama. But I think once it gets into the action set pieces, where it's the cat and mouse game, it loses momentum. It doesn't work for me. And
the fucking rats on his shoulders, and he's got those torches. Oh, it's great.
Yeah, it doesn't grab me the way that the other films do. And the thing is, I'm not necessarily even huge on the other films, except for Last Blood, which I fucking love, and has retroactively make me like all the other ones more. And you know what? I haven't rewatched this since watching Last Blood, so maybe going back and watching it, I'll be like, man, it's fucking great, because I saw Last Blood and I get it now. But as it stands, it is my least favorite of the Rambo movies. Not my least favorite Stallone movie, because Spy Kids 3D is a thing that exists. But
see, that's the other thing that listeners got to consider when you're listening to all of us talk about these things and rank these movies, is that I've seen First Blood maybe like 48 times. You've seen it once, right? I've seen
I've seen it more than once. I've seen it maybe like 7 or 8 times.
All right, but what I'm saying is like Last Blood, I've literally seen one time.
I've literally seen it one time and I loved it.
Yeah, so me too. But like once you see a movie, like I've seen Rambo 4, like 20 times. So once you like sit with a movie for that long, your opinion changes. So
yeah, but
after I see Last Blood a few more times, maybe my opinion will change for the better or worse. You never know, right?
But the thing is, I've had a long time to sit with this. Like, I've been aware of it for over a decade. So saw it when I was
wrong, then you're just wrong.
So yeah, first saw it when I was 13. I'm 29 now. So I've known this film for a long time, seen it a few times through the years, and I'm still left cold pretty much every time. Like, I'll watch that beginning sequence any time of day because I think that's great, but it loses me in the middle.
This is the best score too, Jerry Goldsmith, setting all the precedent with this first score, First Blood.
So yeah, this is the part of the show where we talk about the ranking if people are happy with it or surprised by it. I mean, I was not surprised that First Blood won.
Right?
I was not able to tank it by putting it in last place because everyone else probably rightfully put it as the best Rambo film.
It only won by 1 point.
Yeah, if Last Blood had gotten one more point, it would have won because by our tie rules, it would have won.
Yeah, that would have been wrong. See, that's how I was flip-flopping back and forth between Rambo 4 and Last Blood, so I'm glad that I put it in third now.
Chris, how did you feel about this ranking? I mean, First Blood Part 2 coming in second from the bottom.
I don't agree with it, obviously, and I think there's also a heavy dose of recency bias with how high up Last Blood is. But as long as the first one comes out on top, I'm
the one
satisfied.
important one is where it should be.
Yeah. Again, one of the rare times I agree with Steve.
Twice in one episode.
Well, yeah, that is our episode. Find Lee with his excellent podcast, Tramps Like Us, a Bruce Springsteen podcast. Looking forward to being on that soon. Just binge the entire Springsteen catalog. Find Chris.
We're gonna do a lipstick panel esque like ranking of the albums, I think, one day.
Oh yeah, and I'm gonna piss you off with my bullshit opinions on that. Look, working on a dream is great.
Hey, I love that one too, man. Queen of the Supermarket. Come on.
Right? Fuck yeah, dude.
Right. Yeah.
Find Chris weekly on Pot of Thunder. The opinions are probably about as ridiculous as the ones here. So find Chris on Pot of Thunder. And find us at lipstickgeneration.com. Watch our new music video. We are pimping the hell out of that thing. Actually, I'm going to take that bet because there's an attractive woman in it, and saying pimping in that context might be inappropriate. But yeah, go watch our video for our new single, Eyes of Love. That is our episode. Have a good one, folks. Peace.